What is up, theology nerds? This is Trip, and you're listening to Homebrewed Christianity, the #1 audiological source for theological ingredients, right here off the interwebs into your earpiece. That's right, your earbuds. I'm pumped this week because you get to experience the live Homebrewed Christianity podcast, where we were celebrating the book release of one of my friends and a personal hero, a living saint, Greg Jarrell. Greg's brand new book is called A Riff of Love, Notes on Community and Belonging. Greg is one of those Christians that helps you realize what a real Christian looks like. You're going to hear about that, hear about his intentional community, what it's like to really invest in a particular community, the lessons he's learned around the tensions that exist in the life of the church, what it's like to put your body and life on the line for the oppressed, what it's like to think theologically in an improvisational way with the lived experience of the people around you. It's a fascinating conversation and an inspiring conversation. We recorded it live in Charlotte, North Carolina, where Greg and his family live. And you'll hear more about it, but he's the founder of QC Family Tree. That's the community of hospitality he leads in Charlotte. And he's there. His wife, Helms. They have 2 kids, and they've learned all sorts of stuff. But anyway, before we jump in, just want to remind you 2 things. This coming Monday, the 25th of February, 2019, I'll be in the wonderful city of Atlanta with my friends at McAfee School of Theology at Wild Heavens Brewing Company, or Wild Heaven Brewing Company. I don't remember if there's an S. But nonetheless, that night, 7 p.m., we will start live podcast. It's going to be amazing, going to be zesty. It's free. So why would you not come if you're in the ATL, the Atlanta? February 25th, Atlanta, Wild Heaven Brewing Company. Last thing before we hop in to this conversation is an invitation to the Open and Relational Theology Reading Group. That's right. Tom Ord and I are doing we've been recording some video content, selecting our readings for an open and relational theology reading group. So if you've been thinking about wanting to read contemporary theology, the open and relational theology reading group is featuring 6 different thinkers, from Sir John Polkinghorne, the scientist, physicist turned theologian, Keith Ward, Marjorie Suhaki, process feminist theologian, Clark Pinnock, a Baptist, open theist, to Karen Baker Fletcher, womanist theologian. So it's 6 different thinkers, 6 different questions shaping each one. We wrestle with the text. You get to read the text and interact with people. There's already like 500 people that have signed up to be in the reading group, and we're connecting on Facebook and getting everything. Each video and audio of each session will be delivered to you, and we'll be answering questions in the group and having ourselves a good old time. So go to openandrelationaltheology.com. That's right, openandrelationaltheology.com, and you'll find out more about it. But for now, prepare yourself for Greg Jarrell book release party live experience. Enjoy.
Boom. All right. Hello, everybody here in Charlotte, North Carolina.
The Queen City.
Yes. My name is Trip Fuller. I run the Homebrewed Christianity podcast, which if you're on the internet, you already know that when you're listening. But if you're in this room, you're like, who's Trip's friend that he's talking to right now? That's me. And the Homebrewed Christianity podcast I started 10 years ago. And the whole idea behind it is every week I interview a different scholar, theologian, or someone that's an actual Christian that inspires me. And in hopes that when you listen, you can brew your own faith. Because the overwhelming majority of Christianity fits in the PBR category. You know, like Pabst Blue Ribbon. They get a blue ribbon, an award, apparently, at some point. But today it kind of tastes like chilled piss. Which you'll notice none of the beer at this very fine establishment is a blue ribbon award-winning beer from the, I don't know, whatever century that won in. Not anyone recently. And so what I'm looking forward to is people that are listening to the podcast getting to meet one of my friends, one of my heroes, and decide that they want to not just riff on love personally, but to read the book.
Read the book.
Yeah.
Buy the book.
Buy the book.
Read the book.
I mean, I know you're very committed to consumer capitalism, Greg.
I am.
But see, some people say to themselves, like, I want to give my life and my commitment to my community to make a real difference because I'm inspired by the homeless, dead first century Jew, and others by books of their friends who do that. And so you could be in either category, and when in doubt, buy two.
So here's the book.
It's book blue. There's pictures on it.
It's called A Riff of Love. Riff is a musical term.
Yeah, it's not rift.
Not rift.
Of love.
But riff, R-I-F-F. A Riff of Love. And the subtitle is Notes on Community and Belonging.
Doesn't it just make you want to smile?
And it's pretty, too. They did a nice job on the cover design.
I know. It's high quality.
Yep.
So, when was the moment in your life that you had like the oh shit moment with Jesus? Right? Because a lot of people are Christians and stuff, and then all of a sudden people, if they get into that space where they decide to invest in community, they decide to invest in relationships, before you ever get to dreaming of the life you had now, at some point, your soul got shook. And I want to hear the story.
My soul got shook when I got off of an airplane in St. Louis, Missouri, and the man who became a mentor of mine named Chet drove me across the Mississippi River into East St. Louis, Illinois, which is, along with Camden, New Jersey, one of the two poorest cities in the country. It looks like a war zone. And I was supposed to live in the housing projects of East St. Louis for the summer, working in a recreation center. And this little white boy from Tobacco Town, North Carolina, was absolutely shook by what I saw. I was terrified. And it took me about a couple of days to stop being shocked and to realize that I was being welcomed with this hospitality unlike anything I had experienced in a place where everything I could see told me I didn't belong there. Mm-hmm. But everybody I encountered told me that I did. And so that was the moment of my journey that really just shifted everything for me. Mm-hmm.
So what was an idea or vision of the faith you carried into that space, into that moment, that community that you had to let go of to say yes to where you saw God calling you, and the possibilities of community that the place you came from may not have seen?
So the place I came from, small town outside of Raleigh, what I had learned was that I was going to take Jesus to this place, to East St. Louis. Mm-hmm. And while I was there, I was going to convert people, right? I was going to the evangelical languages. I was going to love on these children.
Amen.
Amen.
Yeah.
And the thing that shifted for me was that I recognized that the good news that I was supposed to be bringing wasn't that many white Christians like me had shown up before and had not changed the economic or the political or the social prospects of the city. And in fact, it was white folks, white Christians in particular, who caused the destruction that was happening there. So as I began to learn the story, I recognized there was something that was deeply malformed in my faith, that I thought I had good news to bring when it was people that had tried to bring the good news and had just destroyed the place, right? Mm-hmm. So if there was some hope, then it was going to have to come from somewhere else. Yeah. Because what I had been taught clearly had not reckoned with the reality of a place like East St. Louis.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that experience you have is something that you had in the past and it brought you to this place is something more people are having today. That awakening where the faith you were handed and the community in which you encountered God and had this spiritual moment has simultaneously blessed you with this divine affirmation and movement, but also burdened you with a divine mandate on understandings of power and community and privilege that actually keep you from genuinely embracing the message of the gospel.
Yeah, absolutely. So my Southern Baptist upbringing in a lot of ways was a real gift, right? I am a state champion at the Bible drill.
Yeah. Praise the Lord. And and Bible drill is not that's like one step back from like straight up like sword drill.
Right, right.
They were trying to get you a little more nonviolent.
Yeah.
Now you just drill people with the Bible. You don't cut them.
So, but that's a real gift, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the verses we had to learn was about I've hidden His word in my heart, right? So I've learned the stories are internalized, but also the stories were taught often in the wrong way, in a way that didn't grapple with the power dynamics. We never learned the story of the exile at all. We barely learned the story of the Exodus except what we had seen in the movies. We just learned a lot of Paul, and we had sort of learned the wrong way of memorizing Paul.
I understand.
Yeah, you know this. So, but at the same time, that's a gift that I still grapple with, right? And it's a gift that's still present in me, and that deep love of Scripture, I think, comes out in a lot of ways in the book and in other ways.
So, one of the other big loves that moves in the book is your love of music.
Yep.
So where was that born?
So I grew up around old-time bluegrass music that my grandfather played, which is improvised music, like the music that I then learned to play. So I joined the middle school band and wound up with this saxophone teacher who had been apprenticed years before under one of the legends of jazz music, a saxophonist named Lee Konitz, who's kind of obscure to most folks, but in the jazz world, that's a big name. And so I was apprenticed to this guy and really fell in love with jazz music, with improvised music in particular. But what I didn't know at that time that I've learned now is that jazz is Black American music. It comes from the tradition of the blues, and it comes from the fires of oppression, right? That the only time folks could express themselves in New Orleans, the enslaved folks down there, was in Congo Square, which is now called Jazz National Historical Park, Louis Armstrong Jazz National Historical Park. So you can still go there, but it was called Congo Square then. And so on Sundays, the enslaved people would actually be able to go and play music together. And this is where the blues was born. This is where almost all American music was born. So I was being trained in this tradition where I was listening to Black musicians, and I didn't know it yet, but I think it was already working on me at that point, that as I was learning to play the saxophone, which I still do, I was listening deeply to a story that I didn't know how to name yet, but it was becoming a part of me.
What is the risk for the person of faith to say yes to improvising?
Because you don't know what's going to happen. That's the gift of improvisation. Like most improvisation, like the stuff you hear on the records, the great stuff, that's not really how it almost ever works. Most of the time, you sort of fall and fail, and sometimes it sounds really bad. So the risk of improvising is you're gonna move in the wrong direction. But the gift is that you can start over. You can. It's a process of formation. So you can keep practicing. You can get better at it. And so there's both the gift and the curse that you're going to mess up a lot. But you're going to mess up a lot anyway. So you may as well just embrace it and keep working with the new material that's born in the process.
How does that picture and that possibilities where the whole is greater than the part shape the way you show up in relationships, in community, and in kind of interactive space that creative tension isn't always expected?
So one of the things that I think I'm saying with the book is that improvisation generally happens in the heat of tight constrictions. And so one of the ways that I've learned how to be Christian from my neighbors in Enderley Park. And we'll say more about Enderley Park later, but my neighborhood is almost all African American. Most of my neighbors are living with experiencing poverty, often poverty across multiple generations. And so they know what tight constrictions are like. Right? And so my argument, if you want to put it that way, is that my neighbors are master improvisers.
Yeah.
And so what they've learned in the heat of the constraints of American society and in the fires of oppression is how to create something beautiful in the midst of a lack of resources, which is basically what an improviser does, right? You count off the tune, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, like this. And then, but then there's nothing there. Like all you have is a little instrument to work with. You've got some air and you have to make it vibrate and you have to do something that's beautiful in the process, right? And so that's what the people of Tuckasegee Road have learned to do. That's what Black Americans across this country have learned to do. And so those are my teachers. Those are the folks that I've been apprenticed under. And so I think the beautiful things that have happened are when we've been open to receiving the gifts of whatever happens in that moment. Mm-hmm. So the moment you're describing, sometimes it doesn't happen often, but improvisation can, like in a key moment where everything clicks, it almost feels magical. Like we've entered into this flow, into this kind of thing that's beyond us that we can't really explain or describe. The only thing you can do in that moment is just accept it as a gift and to try to hold on to it for as long as you can, you know? And so I think that sort of describes the work that we've done, is just to accept the beauty of this gift, that I get to live in this amazing place among people that don't look like me and that have very different experiences than I do. But they call me Brother Greg, and I call them Brother Frank and Sister Michelle. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, what a remarkable gift to be able to accept that.
Mm-hmm. So, as a family, what was it like to decide to invest in a community, move in, get to know it? Because one of the things by the time you get done reading the book is you hear all these stories, and I think you could put it down and be like, man, I like that. I want to go do that, right? But the whole process to getting there is not something that I imagine you read a book and said, well, Jiffy Neato, I think I'm going to go do this. So, like, what were the conversations as a family, and then what was it like moving in? Like, what was that process?
Sure. So, for our family, it was me and Helms, mm-hmm. and then there were some other friends. So we did this in a communal fashion when we first moved over there. And so the process was, Helms is, so I'm fairly bold in sort of making this rather unconventional decision, but Helms is not scared of anything. So, she's beautifully naive almost and not being scared of anything. And so it wasn't hard to convince her. And we also had this, so we were leaving seminary, right? And you know, the seminary, makes you kind of disaffected with the state of the church in the world.
And the state.
And the state. And not just the church. And so it was easy for us to say, like, we have been discipled into something, into this great tradition, but a lot's been wrong about it. And, mm-hmm. and we were, so my first day of seminary was September 11th, 2001. Right. That was the very first day of seminary. And so by the time we left, we had watched a church that was completely impotent in resisting the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, wars that are still going on.
Yeah.
Right. And so even the progressives that we had studied under, like, we knew something is not working in our discipleship. And so it was actually fairly easy for us to say, the only way that we're going to get better teachers is to move next door to some people that can teach us differently.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we're going to be stuck in this thing that's not working for the church and it's not working for the world.
Yeah. So who was your first teacher?
We lived next to this crazy guy named Ulysses. He had lost.
I mean, how many people know it? Like, I mean, if you're going to go by Ulysses, my uncle named Ulysses is anyway, I'd get in trouble for telling that story.
Did your uncle named Ulysses lose both of his legs when they were cut off by a train?
No, but he did live next to a train track and had a drinking problem, so
they might have known one another. They were kindred spirits.
It was in Arkansas.
They were kindred spirits, to be sure. So he was one of the first teachers who just his wildness, the world had not tamed him like it does with most people. And so having folks like him that were deeply welcoming, but also kind of a little crazy in really interesting ways. I think that was really helpful in kind of bringing us out and opening us up to what we needed to learn.
So when you're in divinity school, you get really good at interpreting the Bible, really good at listening to the sermons and knowing you could have done it better. I'm
still good at that.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you cultivate like the ability to sound religious whenever you need to, while secretly rolling your eyes or crossing your fingers in your pocket.
I'm also very good at that.
And one of the other things I think that happens is that the experience you had where you realize that the tradition and the text you've been handed and told were really important is actually really dangerous.
Sure enough.
So, like, how did you manage the sheer frustration, anger, and depression that comes up when you realize we actually have good news to say, and then the very people who've introduced it to you kind of covered it up, and you have to leave them to discover it? Because I know so many people that leave cynical, aware of what's there, and going, whatever,
right.
I'm tapping out.
I give up.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've managed it very well. I might be in the throes of it, of the depression and the cynicism.
Well, yours is significantly less intense than mine.
I think the despair, I mean, this feels like a despairing sort of time, right?
Yeah.
Mike Pence, Mark Harris is a Southern Baptist preacher who stole an election, for those of you all who are out there in the internet, stole an election in North Carolina's 9th congressional district. Southern Baptist preacher, First Baptist Church of Charlotte here.
Come on. That a Southern Baptist would stuff votes to cheat and steal people?
What? That's exactly right. He learned how to do that from the Southern Baptist Convention.
I know. Yeah.
Right. LaDaine was there at the meetings where they were doing it.
I know. Stealing shit for God since 1979.
That's right. That's right. So, but like so this is sort of a time of despair, but also despair is a symptom of privilege. Because the people of the Exodus didn't have a choice as to whether to be hopeful, right? The people in exile, when they lose their hope, Jeremiah writes to them and says, look, you're in a hopeful place, stuck here in Babylon, where God has a purpose and a plan for you. Yeah. So living amongst people with that persistent hope that they refuse to give up has taught me, like, who knows what's possible, right? And even if we don't save America, which seems kind of in doubt, and is not really our project anyway, like, we can build hope into the ground on our block. And even if that's all we do, that's going to be enough.
No, I think that's tweetable, So one of the things that makes me think of is how our culture, and our communities have so segregated themselves ideologically that you can have whole groups of people where their experience of the world doesn't have their neighbors have no affect on their experience of the world, right? And I've because of the podcast, I spend a third of each month basically traveling around talking at random places, from schools to churches of every variety, and around the country, and it's amazing hearing the questions that come from different pockets. And one of the things that shocked me, and why I hope everyone takes time to read and reflect on the book, is that often people of privilege who intend the best for the church, for their community, for the nation and things, I literally have no friends to tell them what the system feels like if you're not on top of it.
Yeah.
Right? And so they just feel bad at a distance from people.
Right.
and they're and having been a minister to the 1% in Palos Verdes Estates in Southern California, there's genuine fear in those people of relationships and friendships across large difference, even though they could be passionately committed to making a difference politically, right? Like, and invested in donating and putting their time in. So, like, I wonder if part of or one of the things I found so powerful about the book itself is that the community isn't like an elective to the faith. It's actually the very fertile ground it's born in.
Yeah, sure.
And so many of us as parents and as leaders don't think about the relationships where our faith grows. So, like, how do you see the church cutting itself off from possibilities because we cut ourselves off relationally?
Yeah, so we have a couple of historians in the room right now. One of them is Tom Hanchett, who's sitting right there. And give it up for Tom, who's done profound work in this community. He talks some about some folks become prisoners of their zip code, where you get locked into the place that you're in. And Charlotte is, like many American cities, very segregated. So there's kind of a crescent around the north and east and west sides of town where most of the people of color live. And then there's a wedge, like a little pizza slice, where lots and lots of wealthy folks live, right? Mm-hmm. So we're very cut off from one another here. And so simply getting out of our zip codes is helpful, right? Proximity is very powerful. And if you're not up close with people who aren't like you, then it's hard to take them seriously as human beings, to take their very personhood seriously. But it's also important to note that proximity doesn't solve everything. You can, Christopher Columbus was proximate to the First Nations people, and that didn't help, right? So you can show up and not pay any attention, and just being close by is not good enough. So I think there's a mix of needing to be close to people who aren't like you, but also, especially for white folks, of taking the time to listen and not trying to do anything for anybody, because that often winds up turning into doing things to people rather than for them, which is not helpful. Mm-hmm.
So in your work, especially when you're telling the stories that you tell in the book in communities of faith and in organizers around the country, like what are the myths you keep running into that are rampant in the minds of well-meaning white people that you might want to choke? Non-violently, of course.
Non-violently.
Man, it's a metaphor.
Yeah. So I think the biggest myth is people talk to us about mission all the time.
Yeah, we love mission.
Right, we love mission. We want to be on mission. We want to do missions. We want to be missional. But we always conceive of the mission as being somewhere else, usually amongst people with more melanin than us, right? But mission really begins from the inside out. Ched Myers told me that, so I have to give credit to Ched. So our work begins from the inside out. And I think that's the most important thing that I try to tell folks on a regular basis. If you're not doing internally the work to discover how Pharaoh has taken up residence inside your soul, then you're going to be of zero use to the Israelites. Mm-hmm. This is why Moses has to be taken out into the wilderness, right? Because he's grown up in Pharaoh's house, and so he has this confused identity. He doesn't know who he is until he's far enough away from everything to listen for a while, to have an encounter with God. And at that point, he recognizes that God wants the oppressed to be set free, and that he himself is being set free in that process. Mm-hmm.
Even thinking about the Moses story, one of the things that continuously shocks me is how white progressive Protestantism really wants someone to play golf with Pharaoh. Like, that's what when they think of successful religious leaders, they're like, hey, Reinhold Niebuhr was friends with the president.
Right.
How did that work out? And we see it today too. And I wonder if there's a new dividing line that's emerging in American religion, and this is across different religious traditions, where some religions see their primary purpose as therapeutic, where you assume the dominant systems of nation state, democracy, capitalism, and all this kind of thing, and you help people deal with their finitude, immorality, so they can be good citizens, purchasers, parents, and Cub Scout leaders or whatever. And you have that therapeutic account of religion, and then one that's prophetic. And the prophetic stream is hard to imagine and hard to create community because so the therapeutic line runs so deep in American religion. Because the church in America has a hard time telling a story about itself that's not connected to our founding.
Right.
That I see. If it wasn't for the fact that a large portion of the people in the country who are the biggest victims haven't left the story of Christianity behind, I'm pretty sure I would.
Yeah.
Right. And so I wonder if, like, where do you see communities of resistance and hope taking place, where you're not debating whether or not you're going to have some type of prophetic form, but it's assumed in discipleship and relationships in that vein are, the center of the plate and not the dessert.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
So, it's happening in the streets for one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we had a big uprising here, September of 2016. And some of y'all were out there with us, Ladane and Anthony and Helms and others. And so, like, the alliances, the friendships that are formed, and those sorts of those are improvised events.
Yeah.
Right. Nobody knows what's going to happen. The only thing you know is that my love for my neighbor and my concern for myself compels me to be out there in the face of the powers that be. Right. So I think that's one place that is happening. That these communities of resistance are being formed, where we're trying to narrate a truthful story about what it means to live as exiles with someone who's imitating Nebuchadnezzar quite literally at the moment in Washington. Maybe another place that we're finding those communities are in places where folks are organizing together to make changes. So maybe those are like food system changes, right? Mm-hmm. Folks are farming in their communities, in their city gardens. They're starting little cooperative businesses. And so in all those places, the Spirit is doing this kind of remarkable work where just a couple of folks, only 2 or 3 are gathered, right? Like the Bible
I've heard of that
says.
before.
And then the Spirit sort of grows and moves that work along. But it's usually kind of hidden and it's hard to find, and it's happening in small ways, I think.
Well, and I think that is an empowering thing to point out, because the number of times people insist on the big institutions they're a part of being a solution that they haven't started acting on is pretty serious. And when you
this is my favorite. Philanthropy, is really there's news this week in Charlotte about the way that housing affordability here is affected by Wall Street landlords. There's some behind the scenes work that I can't spoil for you, but amongst the stories are that one of the biggest philanthropists in town are large investors in a Wall Street corporation that is buying up houses and driving up the rent. Mm-hmm. So on the one hand, they're profiting from people's poverty. And on the other hand, they're giving a pittance to sort of keep up the appearance of caring about it, right? So we have these systems that are just so entrenched.
Yeah.
And, that's where we are. And that's the means of resistance that we have to be pushing against and creating some alternatives.
Mm-hmm. So in the book, you tell a number of stories, and when I've written books that involve telling stories, thinking back through periods of your life and stuff, I was always surprised which ones landed emotionally, mm-hmm. and when you start to type it, you go, oh, junk, and your eyes sweat.
Yeah.
Or you're retelling it and going, if I wasn't there, there's zero chance I would believe this. And that kind of thing. Somebody hooked the man up with a refill, you know. It's his book release party. Come on, you know. So what's one of the stories when you are sitting there thinking about telling it and such where you were like, wow. Yeah. Well, what's up with that?
Yeah, yeah. So the first, the very first story in the book is one of the most amazing things that ever happened to me. Can I tell the story right now?
No, that's what I was trying to get you to tell a story. Because the book has lots of stories in it.
The book has lots of stories.
And we want them to hear the story in order of the book.
It's really well written, so they should actually read it in the book.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna.
This is just a taste, a little tasty taste.
I'm gonna tell you the punchline of the story. So I was walking around late at night in my neighborhood, and I remember this is supposedly one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the city. And I'm this poor, naive-looking white guy, right? And it's late at night, and I'm trying to find this kid who's supposed to start summer camp the next day. And it was a terrific camp at one of the large Black Baptist churches here. Amazing opportunity for him. But the family was homeless, and so I went looking for them at the last place I knew them to be staying. Homelessness often looks like couch surfing rather than sleeping under a bridge. And so their most recent spot they were couch surfing was what our neighbors call a trap house, or what you might have heard previously called a crack house, right? So a drug house. And so it's late at night, and I'm a white guy in a Black neighborhood with a reputation for violence, and I went and knocked on the door at the crack house. My mother was not thrilled to learn about that later. And so this really strange interaction ensued where the guy whose job is to answer the door and to assess who's there, sees me, and he's quite surprised. And I asked, is this lady here, with her son? I'm trying to find them. I'm sorry to be bothering you late at night, and so on. And he invited me in, which is an odd thing, right? And so I went in, and the way I've tried to narrate it is that two worlds are colliding at this point. I'm still kind of new in the neighborhood, and I've been unlearning some things, but I don't really exactly know what it means to be white, but you learn what it means to be white when you're in a crack house late at night and nobody knows where you are and you don't have a cell phone. Like, that's when you understand you are the enemy. And so a little scene ensues, that involves some yelling. And the end result of that is that the guy who answered the door says to the lady who I was looking for, who was there, "There's a white man at the door to see you." And there are different ways to say there's a white man at the door to see you. And he meant it in the most disturbing of those ways. And so my friend, Ray, pops around the corner, and there's always a party going on in this house. So he was in the next room. I hadn't heard him, but he pops around the corner and he looks out and he sees me, and he says, "That's not a white man. That's Greg." And like, that's the good news, right? That's, like, you talk about working from the inside out. Mm-hmm. Like, to be named, everything that I was afraid might happen, it seemed like all of a sudden it was about to happen. Like, I had walked into this situation that could go really badly. And instead I was met with this hospitality that's unlike anything I've ever experienced. For him to just, this is one of the poorest residents of our city. A guy who, all the systems that have been designed to crush the souls of Black people have crushed his soul. He's a remarkable human. And he looks at me and says, "You're not white." Man, that's the most profound thing that's ever happened to me. So I've tried to tell the stories that like this has been a remarkable experience of unlearning what it means to be white and to be taught that by these amazing teachers that nobody else in this, very few people outside of our neighborhood know the depth of the teaching that I've experienced there. So I think it's good news. That's why I've tried to tell it.
Yeah. So as a family, what are the moments that you hope your kids point back to, and when they're trying to explain their weird upbringing to their friends, like think like when their grandparents, right, and their grandkids are talking to them, like what's the experience or lessons learned that you want to linger with them?
I try to just tell them the truth, and they intuit the truth of the shared history of people on this continent. So I think the most important thing is I just want them to be able to just know the truth and to tell other people the truth, honestly. So, like last Thanksgiving, my younger son and I were walking through a park in Garner, where his grandparents live, and there was a plaque there that said that we were on the site of a land grant from one of the kings of England, right? And he asked, "What does this mean?" And so, as a family, we're just committed to telling each other the truth. So I told him this was like when somebody takes a toy that doesn't belong to them and says it's theirs now. That's what a land grant is. And he still talks about that. Like, he understands. So, our basic commitment as a family is, like, we're going to look at what's in front of us and we're just going to tell the truth about it. We're just going to name it. And I hope that when they're talking to their grandchildren years down the road, that they're still doing that. They're still, that they're learning how to read the Bible from the underside amongst the people that God continues to choose to work out salvation in the world. And that if they keep reading the Bible that way, that maybe we'll get saved together.
So one of the things that has struck me in the last year, I spent the last 10 years before that in Los Angeles, and all my children are Los Angelites. I have 3. And the 11-year-old in the last year has discovered what the South is like. So he was at a very progressive diverse UCC congregation in Los Angeles, and I've been the token straight guy on ministry staff where he's been. So has been much more diverse. So we come back, and if you're in the South and are Progressive Baptist, you visit Progressive Baptist churches, which are the diversity's like a saltine, like different parts of it are slightly more toasted than the others, and so the. We're at the third church we visited, and Elgin leans over. We're like 10 minutes in, and he goes, "Dad, we can't go to this one." I'm like, "Why?" I'm sitting there thinking, "Hey, the prayer of confession mentioned some social ills whatsoever. Like, it's always good to confess that you're killing the planet and pillaging the poor instead of, that." You stared too long at breast or something. So, I'm like, this is good. So, and I go like, why? What's wrong? And he goes, this room is like the middle of an Oreo. And I'm like, and you can tell he's thought about this, that he thinks it's profound. I'm like, yeah, what do you mean? And he's like, no, it's all white. It's like the middle of an Oreo. Like, you can't even enjoy it if you don't actually have the cookie parts, right? And I was like, yeah, can we wait till the church service is over? And he goes, yeah, we can't come back here. Yeah. And we pull out the church, and we turn, and this is in downtown Raleigh, and it's right on the center square. And when we're pulling out, there is an African-American family walking in front of a statue with cannons pointing at them. And at the top it says, "For our Confederate dead."
Confederate dead, that's right.
And he starts crying. Now, I've walked by this statue and all of them down there with my grandfather growing up in downtown Raleigh, where he tells the story of all of our family members in every war that's there. And gets to the Vietnam one, and he was in it, and tells stories of his friends that died in Vietnam. And the connection between those narratives and the church were just seamless.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Elgin, what's wrong? He said, did you see that? What? It says our Confederate dead.
Mm-hmm.
They lost. And I'm like, yeah? He goes, and people just walk in front. They make all of our African American neighbors walk in front of that like it's a good thing. Now, and I say it just because, like, I grew up here, and coming back, I realized just how white and Southern I am that I would have never noticed till my kids grew up in an environment that's not normative.
Right.
Right? And so one of the things I love about this book, and I think is important about having community that are different, that don't share oppressive narratives that they put the sticker of Jesus on, is that there really is potential by creating communities of difference and blessing and openness that humans can learn a different story if they're born into one that's different.
Yeah.
And exist in one relationally. And one of the most exciting parts about the book for me is knowing there are certain family members I can ask them to read that book who I would never tell that story to.
Yeah.
Right. And I wonder how you see negotiating those different narratives you're born into as a white Southern Baptist in the South, and where highlighting, revealing, critiquing, poking, like what are the places to push where progress is possible?
So this is, one of the most interesting things that's happened to me over the past 6 weeks as this book has been published is that I have sold more books to Rockingham County, North Carolina, than to anywhere else outside of Charlotte. So Rockingham County, for those out there in the world that don't know, is just north of Greensboro, and they tell community organizers not to go there if they want to show up back home at night, right? So this is not a kind or pleasant place to be. But there are currently like dozens of copies of this book floating around because the Southern Baptist Church that my grandmother went to, that my mother was raised in, has like everybody's reading it. This is I have no idea how to conceive of this, but they're inviting me to come and speak there, right? So part of what I'm trying to do is I have a lever that I can use to push and make a little change, right? And so there are folks out there. I grew up in the Southern Baptist world. I can speak their language. It's not my preferred language, right? But I know how to speak it. And so I can show up in that place with a really powerful story. I mean, that's not a white man. Argue with that. Mm-hmm. Nobody's going to argue with that, right? So I've got this lever that I can push on, that I can show up in that place. But at the same time, the credibility that I think we've established from living where we've lived for the past 15 years and the relationships that we've developed also means that we've been able to organize a community land trust with our neighbors in West Charlotte, that we've been working on really important issues of justice for young people and for their families. And so being able to move in both of those worlds has been one of those gifts. And so I try to be really careful not to make that like translation. Mm-hmm. It's not my job to tell the stories of my neighbors, but it is my job to say, I've been so deeply and profoundly changed by this. And so there are folks like this Southern Baptist Church in Rockingham County that are willing to listen to that and where I can exert some influence. Mm-hmm. And so given that opportunity, that's what I'm going to do.
Okay. Because when you read this book, here's what comes to my mind. If I'm like finishing divinity school and deciding, do I want to be a minister or a Christian? I'm going to read the book and say to myself,
I want to be a Christian.
I'm going to be like, this is like the greatest hits You know, these are like the stories. These are like your greatest hits.
Right.
And I want to know your biggest fail. Like something where you tried, it was definitely crash and burn. If you can't think of it, I'm sure Helms will.
I was looking at her.
Like your biggest fail, so that if we're sitting there saying, I might go Christian instead of going Rev, that they know like, well, Greg failed that bad. So, and he turned out okay.
Yeah. Helms, do you have some help? No?
Now we're going to all question your humility. It's like, when did you fail? I got nothing. I'm like Moses at the end of the Pentateuch, where I note how I was the most humble person who ever lived. That's a Bible reference at the very end of, anyway.
All right, so I'm trying
He says he was the most person that ever lived. If he wrote it, it would be awkward to self-identify yourself as the most humble person.
All right, so I'm trying to think of a specific, I can think of a couple of specific instances.
Which one will we laugh at you the most?
All right, I'm trying to think of what story works the best. But the biggest mistake for me has been not speaking, staying silent when I should have spoken up. And so that's happened in several contexts. For one, so about a year ago, I was in this housing symposium. We do a lot of housing stuff. Housing is terrible, by the way. Homes are tremendous. You shouldn't talk about affordable housing. You should talk about the fact that families have to have a place to live. That's an aside. So we were in this housing symposium, and there were some really powerful people from our community that said, we've created this fancy new document from our task force, right? That we do that a lot in Charlotte. We create task force that produce documents that help us to not make any motion on social issues. And so they said, we produced this document. We want to present our results to you. And a lady who was out in the streets with us during the uprising stood up and said, who are the homeless or near homeless people that helped you to produce this document? And it was tremendous. The woman used every possible strategy to deflect from that question. And then she moved on, and I sat silently when I should have jumped up and interrupted the entire room and turned over however many tables it took to get an answer to the question. When I should have raised my voice has been the biggest mistake that I've made along the way.
Thanks. Well, join me in thanking Greg. And remember, the book is available right there.
The book is available. It's called A Riff of Love, Notes on Community and Belonging.